So you are a long-time activist to start with. You were particularly involved in the 1970s in the fight against nuclear and for the Larzac, an important and ultimately a victorious movement in protesting against the eviction of all farmers from a plateau in southern France to extend a military base. You've been a farmer as well for 45 years, very actively involved in the French trade union for farmers, La Confédération Paysanne. You became particularly well known worldwide in the late 90s as a figure of the anti-globalization movement, and in particular as the spokesperson for the global farmers union La Via Campesina. One particular action, the Pacific dismantling of a McDonald's franchise that was under construction in Millau, next to your house actually, brought you to the center of public attention. Somehow later, you also were a contestant for the French presidential elections in 2007. That might not be your best political memory of your career. You can tell us about it if you want or not. You were elected as an MEP in 2009 on the Europe Ecologie list, which combines civil society figures like yourself and the Green Party in France. You've been chosen by the Green Group in 2014 to lead the European election, and you were re-elected in 2014. You are a member today of the Green EFI group in the European Parliament. Your parliamentary activities, as far as I'm aware, deal mainly with agriculture and trade policies, but also you do not hesitate to intervene on other important issues like the delegate or the Tobacco Products Revision Directive. That said, I wanted to invite you in particular to open this conference with a personal testimony, actually, because I thought that your life itself already provides lots of food for thought for our topic today. You've been politically active most of your life, as we said, but at the same time, you were also very well known for your strong opposition to the use of GM crops in agriculture, as well as for fracking for shale gas. You actually even served prison sentences in France for destroying GM crops and the McDo dismantling, including test fields of private or public research institutes. Some of your critics call you anti-science or science mower, faucheur de science, from the name of the anti-GM group, the voluntary mowers, the faucheurs volontaires, to which you used to belong. At the same time, as a farmer for the major part of your life, you had to deal with the daily reality of the difficulties of agriculture. Your father is an internationally recognized biologist. Your mother was a life sciences teacher. You were the first MEP, actually, to demand drastic measures, including cutting down centuries-old olive trees in Italy to fight the spread of the Glilla fastidiosa bacteria. And you are today following very closely the legislative developments around the trading of human gametes. So I don't think I'm talking about someone who opposes the use of GM crops in agriculture out of ignorance. So my first question is a very simple one. Why did you destroy GM crops, including test fields by public researchers? And my second question is larger and easier to ask, but probably more difficult to answer. What is science to you? What is science as for a politician? You have 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
So I try to do it in English, and if I have some problem, I speak in French. Thank you very much for inviting me to begin these 2 days debate. Directly I go on the subject. Why did I destroy GM fields, but also seeds? The first answer I can give is that as farmer, the first thing we were fighting against was the privatization of seeds. That was clearly the beginning of our fight in 1996 in France. So, il faut descendre le micro. Voilà, il faut demander.
Non, je vais demander à Martin.
Ouais, c'est lui demande à lui, donc je le fais.
Merci.
Voilà. So this was really, for me, the beginning. And why did we do that? I think it was quite clear. It was not a scientific problem in the beginning, for the companies, they were using techniques only to privatize. This was the objective. It was not a scientific debate on is it going to be a better way to do, what are going to be the impacts. They didn't care of that. The only thing they wanted was privatization of the seeds. And this since the beginning of GMOs in the United States. So why do I say that? It's very clear. When the first GMs begin in the United States, the only argument which was given, which they thought it was a scientific argument given to the American administration, was to say that between corn, traditional corn, and a GM corn, there was an equivalent, a substance equivalence. Everybody knows that that has no meaning. It means nothing. It's a completely stupid thing. And what is interesting, since I'm here in the parliament, since 2009, I was in discussion with EFSA on substance equivalence. And I told them, okay, this is the base now for you and for United States and for the companies. The European Commission, the American administration, and the international organism, they all believe in this, and this is the base for accepting GMO. So we need to have a debate at the European level on this equivalence in substance. And we had this, and we could do it. Unfortunately, we had only one debate, but it was on streaming, so if you want to see it, you go on the EFSA board. I think we can find it. I hope so. So we could explain at that moment that it doesn't exist. But in the same times, we could see in a very lot of debates all over the world, inside of WTO, or in the debate now with the TTIP between the United States and Europe, or with Canada, that for all the subjects as GMO, as cloning, and so else, they were always saying the only debate possible has to be based on science evidence. But what is science evidence for them? The only science evidence is what is good for the companies. It's not based on a global discussion on what is the techniques, what are the effects, environmental effects, social effect, economic effect, everything. It's never seen as a global problem. So it's not science. For me, this is clearly not science. So that's why we begin to destroy this field, to say this is criminal to bring these seeds in France, in the south part of France, where we have a lot of corn. And in 97, 98, when we destroy seeds from a company which was called Novartis, who was making GMOs at that moment, we destroyed the capacity of growing 35,000 hectares. And we destroyed the seeds by mixing them with ordinary corn. So they were not able to see which was the good one and which was the GM one. So we destroyed completely by mixing it. And that was the first demonstration we did. If we didn't do this, we would now have GMOs all over the place in France, which is the first country for the companies. And why these big companies now are very angry and are still pushing to bring back GMOs is because France refused GMOs. In the beginning, nobody knew about it. But now, 75, 80% of the people refuse them. And which is quite interesting, that this position is now the position of the left and the right-wing parties. I'm not sure that any party is going to change this. Maybe, I don't know, in the future. But in 2008, we had a ban of GMOs with Mr. Sarkozy. And the legislation now is under Mr. Hollande, which is two completely, of course, politician views, but it's not possible for them to go in front of the people. So this is how things begin. In the same times, we also made a demonstration, as to answer to your question. We destroyed rice, which was growing in a greenhouse in Montpellier. And this was in a greenhouse from the public research, which his name is CIRAD, which worked with developing countries. Why did we do this? We didn't do it alone. This rice was genetically modified with a partnership with Monsanto to be put in land outside and not staying in the greenhouse. And we destroyed it with Indian farmers because they didn't want genetically modified rice to come in their country and to pollute everything where they were living. So we did this demonstration. Most of the searchers in this institute didn't know that they were growing genetically modified rice. And when, after we were in front of the court for this action, the searchers came and said, we didn't know about this. The Institute never told us that we were working in partnership with Monsanto. And that's why they supported us. And they made, how you say this, a petition saying, and the title of the petition was saying, we have to open the science for a public debate. It was not only a cooperative defense from them, from the civil society, but it was saying we have to open what we are working about. And it's not possible to stay inside of our institute with completely getting out with the public debate. And this was a very important moment, because instead of being attacked by them, by the searchers in this institute, they were supporting us and saying, now we need to open our research. Of course, it was not the same position of the French academies of health, Academy of Science. They were fighting completely against us. And they signed a petition the day we were in front of the court to say that we had to be put in jail. That's what happened, of course, after. And some of these searchers, after that, many months after, in a debate, one of them told me, I signed the petition, but could you explain me what was the reason why you did this? Because I don't know, but I signed by solidarity for the other members of the big institute. So this is interesting to see how science could work. And this is why I think that after the fact that the first thing we were fighting against was privatization, after the second part was the impact on agriculture, the impact on the environmental issues, about natural plants, about insects, and so on and so on. And one of the big fight we had to do, because the companies refused it in the beginning, was to say that corn genes can flow very far. And they were saying, no, it's not possible because it's very heavy. The problem that where I live in the south of France, in summer, we have very often a lot of wind. And we have to clean our cars because we have sand coming from Sahara, crossing the sea. So our genes, corn genes, more heavy than sand, I'm not sure. So it's an evidence. Before we had the first documents explaining how pollen can go on a very large distance, it takes many years. And it will already, and the companies, they didn't do this work. It was public research, some people of the public research, which decided to do this, to see exactly what was happening. So I can explain more things on this, but I think this is how things went on. And for me, if the companies come back, of course, I will also come back in the field. Because for me, this is not because I am now in the European Parliament that I'm not a citizen. And I think it's very important also as parliamentarians to be acting as people from the civil society.
Thank you very much. Okay, so are there any questions to for Mr. Bové? Not all of them.
Don't be afraid. I don't bid.
I see one here, Mr. Millstone, for Millstone.
Eric Millstone from the University of Sussex. It is true that, okay, thank you, Martin. It may be true that there can be a question about how far pollen can travel, but surely there is also a question about how far seeds travel. So, for instance, where I live in the United Kingdom, where we have what they call an oilseed rape, we're told, oh, the pollen can't travel far, but we have plants growing several kilometers away from the original fields because the birds carry the seeds. Surely that can happen with maize as well.
No, this is completely true. And what I didn't say, to continue what I was going on with the debate on the privatization of seed, all the problems what happened in the United States about the fact that some farmers were attacked by Monsanto because they were telling that they had been stealing the patent on the modification. This is completely crazy. But what is the problem now? And I think you're going to debate of this tomorrow and the day after. Is that, and I didn't answer to the question about science, is that now we know clearly that it's not possible to stop, and it should be crazy if somebody wanted to say, we want to stop science. That has no sense. The knowledge cannot stop, and I think it's important. The only thing we have to debate about, for me, is that what do we do with the knowledge, and how this knowledge is interfering with the society, and what is the impact on all the biodiversity on this example. And this is real for seeds, but it's real also for nanoparticles, and so on and so on. We can find a lot of examples about this. So the debate is not about what is science, but how science is taken by companies to have only their business and to go quicker and quicker to transform and to privatize for their own interest. And this is really now a very important debate, because the technologies, for example, on seed, the new technologies are going quicker and quicker. And it's more and more difficult to be able to see exactly what is happening. So how do we change this? There's a debate since a few months now in the United States from researchers saying, with the new technologies, we have to have a moratorium, because we're not going to be able, if this goes out in the open fields, to go back, because the new technology are not so, how you say, the first transgenic technology was quite an old way of trying to change and to privatize seeds and to transform. Now we have more new technologies which are quicker and which are able to change very quickly. And so this is the new problem. And this is not only for seeds, it could be also for human being, for animals, insects, etc. So we have to be, to find a way to make really now a cut between research, science, and how do we do with the technology. It's not because we know how to do it that we need to do it. This is a very old debate we have since the atomic bomb. Since that, this debate is not finished. But I think it's one of the most important things. Of course, we'll always have crazy people who will want to go further and further. I had this crazy man in South Korea which wants to clone everything and to transform. We have the transhumanist movement, which also completely going on that direction. But how are we able to stop it? And the problem is that, for me, the politicians are not trying to find out about that. They are still going where the companies want to go. And when I say the company, it's not true that it's only the companies, but also, unfortunately, the public research in a lot of countries, because they don't have enough money to work. And the way research is organized put more and more links between the private companies and the public research. We are making we begin to make a study. We're going to be able to finish this study in maybe 1 month or two. And we try to see how much money went to, for example, the biotech given by the European Union, and how much money went to organic agriculture in the research budget. This is quite complicated debate, but I can show you only this picture because we have already some pictures, which is very interesting. This is the line of the biotech, and now we are reaching between 75 and 80% of the budget for agriculture is going to biotech. It was 10 years ago at 20%. Now, 10 years after, we are more than 75%. This is what is decided by the European Union. At the same time, if we look what is there, which is for organic research, we begin maybe at 2, and now we're between 4 and 5. At one moment, we rise 10, but it went down after. And now we are 4, 5. This is very interesting to see clearly. We can have all the debates we want, but clearly in the Council and also in the European Parliament, they are mainstream with the European Commission. They're going in the same direction. And this is, I think, one of the main problems we have now. There's no reflection on what is research, public research, and technology. These are two things completely different. But unfortunately, now those two things are linked more and more, because if you want to make public research and if you want to have new knowledge, you need more technology. And the companies, they now more and more decide to use the technologies of the knowledge only in their own interest. If it was a state, it could be the same. Because now, for example, we have more and more, and this is true, I think, in most of the European countries, I think it would be interesting to find about it, how many patents now are published in partnership between public research and private companies. Even in France, it didn't exist before. It was built a specific organism to have patent, which would be bring on for everybody between public research and the companies. So I think this is one of the big problems now.
Just another question.
Yes. Erica from IFOAM-EU, the Organic Food and Farming Movement. So, José, I mean, you've been an activist, but you're also a politician, a member of a parliament. Very often, when we debate issues like GMOs or biofuels, we are in a situation where we have the science funded by the industry that says one thing, the science funded by, you know, public research or independent researchers saying another thing. And in our experience, politicians, most of the time, in the best case, they feel intimidated because they are not scientists themselves. So they don't really get into this debate, or in the worst case, they simply don't give a shit, in the sense they've chosen side already, you know, and they are not interested either to get into the details of what science says, what are the limits of what, you know, a given article can say or not. So my question is, do you think that we have the right tools in a democracy and in a parliament to really have a meaningful scientific debates? If we take the example of the risks or not of GMOs, or even, you know, biofuels and ILUC, for example, on each topic, usually it's very difficult in a parliament, to take this example, to have a real debate on that. So do you think that our democracies have the right tools to discuss science, or do you think that new ones should be invented, like, I don't know, conference of citizens, these kind of things?
Well, you give the answer at the end, but of course, I think we have to find new tools. Transparency is one thing, but for taking the decisions, we have to be clear that we have to find the good ways to do it. Because very often we see that the parliamentarians, as a citizen, they don't decide by themselves because they don't have the tools to find out what are the problems. And if they are linked to some companies or some political group, they easily accept what the companies are saying. But it's not always the same. I can give two examples. First example, GMOs. Most of the conservatives in the parliament think that the problem of GMO is not a problem. And we don't have a majority in the parliament against GMOs, clearly. And that is quite incredible because 75% of the people in Europe refuse GMOs. But it's not connected between the parliamentarians, the politicians, and the public opinion of the country. On the other side, and we saw this a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, we voted for the second time in the 5 last years against cloning and the fact that we can import animals coming from cloning. And a large majority of the parliament voted against the fact that we can accept cloning and so on. And this is quite interesting because the companies and the European Commission really wanted to bring this issue on because we have the debate on the TTIP for the transatlantic exchange. So we had two subjects, but with two different issues. So I think we have to find out why on this kind of issues we can have different view by the parliamentarians. Why on one thing they can say no, for ethic reasons, welfare, animal welfare and so on, why they say no, and why, for example, on GMOs, most of them have a different position. I don't know, I don't have the answer, but it could be interesting. But in the same times, for example, when a few years ago we put this fight against EFSA because the president of EFSA was coming from the biggest lobby, international lobby on food and industry, which is ILSI. She was member of the board at the European level, and we put this on the table. And at the end, she went out. She'd been kicked out from EFSA. At that moment, we could be able to mobilize the parliament, and the majority of the parliament said, if this is still going on, if she stays there, we're no giving any more budget to EFSA. And we had the majority to do this. And this was incredible. And they knew clearly who was making this fight. And we did this because, of course, we wanted also to have this debate on how EFSA was working. And so we had a majority at that moment. And it was interesting, and the people from EFSA were happy about what we did. So we have contradictions. And so it's not possible for me to have one answer on this subject. We need tools, we need transparency, but we need now also to change the view. Oh, I didn't cut my phone. This is classical. And so we have to find out how we can bring reflection on science inside of the parliament. How research, maybe it's a long work. It's not only 2 days debate, but I think what we need now clearly is to be able, for the parliamentarians, the politicians, even the people from the Commission, to be able to understand about what we're talking, because things are completely changing. Very often, for example, the politicians say, we have, for example, alors in French we say, recherche fondamentale. I don't know how you say this. And on the other side, we have recherche appliquée. Yes. This is no more true since years. This is finished since years, because two are linked. And it's very often the effects they wanted to find, which brings new knowledge. So it's not able to cut things like this, because it doesn't work. How we very often say that we have the techno-scientific, it's not lobby, but which is pushing, which are linked. So the fact is that how now are we able to separate things or not? It's very difficult. And this is why it's a big mess.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid time is up on this slot, but we will have more time to take questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Bové, for your